It's estimated that at any given time, there are up to 90,000 missing persons, and that's just in the United States. Imagine if your loved one went missing. Is there anything that you wouldn't do to try and find them? This is Missing Persons, and I'm your co-host, Mike Morford. In every episode of Missing Persons, you'll hear about a person who disappeared and currently remains missing, as well as the efforts to find them. In some cases, there are clues to follow and leads to check on. In other cases, it's as if the person just vanished off the face of the earth. In each episode, you'll hear from someone that's desperately searching for that missing person. And whether they've been looking for 30 days or 30 years, the struggle to find answers is real. Will you join us and become part of the search for answers in these cases? If so, search for and subscribe to Missing Persons wherever you listen to podcasts. There are dozens of episodes available to binge on right now, and new episodes come out every other Saturday.
You're listening to Below the Surface, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, DNA ID, Scene of the Crime, Zodiac Speaking, Beyond Bizarre True Crime, Campus Killings, and Killer Communications. All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
A missing person, a strange death, a vanished vehicle, a series of unanswerable questions. In so many true crime mysteries, the answers remain elusive. But in many instances, the clues lead right to the water's edge, and sometimes the truth lies below the surface. Welcome back to Below the Surface. I'm your host, Olivia, and today I'm unpacking the case of 52-year-old Colleen Wood. In December of 2000, Colleen embarked on a cruise with her boyfriend. Since last calling a friend on December 13th of 2000, Colleen has never been heard from again. Her family believes that she was murdered, but if this is true, the crime scene is in the middle of the ocean. Is it possible for this case to ever be solved? Let's dive in. Colleen was a native of Akron, Ohio. She married young and welcomed her two sons, Michael and Todd. She divorced when her boys were small. To support them, she worked in a hospital, and though she reportedly had a long-term relationship with a man while her boys were growing up, it doesn't seem like her partner lived with her, and she mostly raised her two sons as a single mother. By 1998, her sons had grown up, married, and moved out of the house. And along with her empty nest, Colleen had two other big life changes. Her long-term relationship came to an end, and the hospital who'd employed her for 20 years downsized and laid her off. But Colleen saw this as an opportunity. She'd always dreamed of moving to Florida. She loved boating and sailing and wanted to own her own boat one day. So while the layoff and the disintegration of a decades-long relationship was very hard, nothing was holding her back from living her dreams anymore. In the fall of 1998, she moved to Boca Raton in Florida and took a job as an office manager for the Lighthouse Point Marina. Colleen was a kind and gregarious woman, and her boss, the customers, and her fellow colleagues loved her to the point of giving her the nickname Mum of the Marina. She loved working there so much, she bought a condo not far from Lighthouse Point and reportedly was acting happier than she had in a long time. About a year into her new beach and sailing lifestyle, Colleen noticed an ad from a man named John Paul, who was looking for a female sailing companion to take along on a year-long cruise around the world on his 55-foot schooner. Colleen had always wanted to travel the globe by sailboat. The trip sounded like the culmination of her lifelong dreams, so she quickly answered the ad. Upon meeting John Paul, Colleen found a tanned, salt-and-pepper-haired man in his 60s who had some very impressive credentials. He held a business degree from Harvard and was a successful mutual fund manager with millions of dollars to his name. He was also a retired professional race car driver. He'd won his first race in 1968 before taking a leave of absence to live on a sailboat after his wife divorced him and took custody of their son, John Jr. But John told Colleen he returned to racing in 1975 when John Jr. decided that he wanted to be a racer too. The two formed a father-son team who went on to win some of the world's most famous races, including the 24 Hours of Le Mans in 1978, the Trans Am Series in 1979, and the 24 Hours of Daytona in 1982. Colleen found John adorable, and the two fell into what Colleen's family reported as a whirlwind romance. John treated Colleen to expensive dinners, and most weekends they sailed around the US coast on his schooner. At one point, he bought her a diamond bracelet and let her rename his schooner Diamond Girl. He also took her to Europe and offered her a job as an assistant on the schooner. Her friends said Colleen was beyond smitten with John, and after only a few months of dating, she sold her condo and gave away most of her belongings in order to move into the schooner full-time. While her sons were a little concerned about her selling off almost all of her belongings, the boat did have limited space on board, and Colleen explained that their one-year trip around the world was too long a time to worry about keeping so many things. But her friends also became alarmed when she quit her job at the marina. Her boss, Maureen Canada, told Unsolved Mysteries, "I was very, very shocked when Colleen told me that she was leaving. I personally was very concerned about her selling all of her assets to take this trip." Colleen had also confided to Maureen that John got verbally abusive when he drank, and he drank often. And though Colleen brushed off Maureen's concerns, her friends and family became even more uncomfortable when they found out that Colleen had given John the $43,000 profit from her condo sale to invest on her behalf. Despite these issues, John always presented himself as a pleasant man who doted on Colleen whenever they went to friends' parties or visited Colleen's sons. The relationship may have seemed to move a little quickly, and a few of Colleen's choices were bizarre to those who knew her, but she repeatedly told everyone that she'd always wanted to sail around the world, and that this would probably be her only opportunity to ever do it, and she didn't want to pass it up. On December 3rd of 2000, Colleen called her older son Michael, telling him that she'd obviously be missing Christmas due to the start of her and John's travels. She told him that she was shipping the grandchildren's holiday presents to him. She also told him that she and John were headed to Key West around December 14th, which would be the first port of call on their journey. She said she'd call Michael with updates once they left the Keys. Michael wished his mother the best time and they hung up. On December 15th, Maureen called Colleen to invite her and John to the marina's annual Christmas party. The party was on the 19th, and even though Colleen had resigned, Maureen still hoped that she could come. Colleen replied that they were already in Key West, but that she certainly wouldn't miss a party with her marina friends. She'd make sure they came back before they started their grand tour, and she couldn't wait to see everyone again. But on December 19th, Colleen and John never showed up to the marina Christmas party. Maureen didn't think too much of it at the time. Sailing several hours up the coast just for a party wasn't something that she'd expected John to do, but Colleen's sons had a much larger reason to begin worrying. The gifts that Colleen had promised were in the mail for her grandchildren never arrived, and she would never have forgotten to send Christmas presents for her family. Things got even more concerning when she didn't call to wish them Merry Christmas over the holidays. And both Michael and Todd were convinced that something had gone very wrong when she didn't call to wish them a Happy New Year either. At first, they tried to tell themselves that she may just not have had service if she was travelling on the ocean, but she had promised she'd call after she'd left the Keys, and they'd never heard anything from her. By January 8th of 2001, Michael and Todd desperately called their mother's cell phone. But instead of her voicemail, they were met with a message that her account had been disabled on December 28th due to a lack of payment. Michael and Todd also realised that they had no contact information for John, so that there was no way to call him to find out where they were, if they were in the middle of the ocean, and where their mother might be. Michael immediately contacted police to report his mother missing. But unfortunately, with no house or car to search and nothing criminal to act as a lead, police were not able to do very much for the Wood family. So Michael and Todd contacted the Coast Guard and the FCC to try and locate Diamond Girl. But by February, there were no signs of the schooner, and the Woods had not heard anything from Colleen.
Do you have $10,000 or more in credit card debt? Maybe you're even barely getting by making minimum payments. With credit card debt hitting record highs, National Debt Relief offers real debt relief solutions for people struggling to keep up. These options may reduce a large portion of credit card debt for those who qualify. You don't need to declare bankruptcy, and you may be able to pay back less than you owe, regardless of your credit. National Debt Relief has already reduced the credit card debt for more than 550,000 consumers. So don't wait. If you owe 10, 20, or even hundreds of thousands of dollars in credit card debt, you can now take advantage of this financial debt relief as the cost of living increases. To find out how much you could save, visit nationaldebtrelief.com. That's nationaldebtrelief.com.
As his mother's disappearance turned from weeks to months, Michael desperately searched the internet for any contact information or addresses that he could find for John Paul. But instead of contact information, Michael found evidence that John Paul had a dark criminal past. Starting in 1979, John, his son John Jr. and their friend were all caught and convicted of marijuana smuggling off the coast of Louisiana. They received 3 years probation and were fined $32,000. But John Sr. violated the terms of his probation by being the alleged leader of a drug trafficking ring. The ring got busted by the feds and John was set to go to trial in 1983. In retaliation, John attempted to kidnap a state witness who was going to testify against him in his upcoming trial. According to this witness, on April 19, 1983, John ordered him to get into the trunk of his car at gunpoint. When the witness fled, John shot him 5 times, hitting him in the chest, abdomen, and leg. John was arrested for attempted murder but made bail and fled the US. He was apprehended in Switzerland when he got caught using a fake passport. The Swiss legal system sentenced him to 6 months in prison before extraditing him back to the US in March of 1986. Upon his return, John accepted a plea deal for attempted first-degree murder and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. However, he was paroled after only 13 years of time served and released on July 2nd of 1999. John had only been out of prison for 4 months when Colleen answered his ad, but this wasn't the only thing that made Colleen's family worried for her. John had a documented history of violent anger. Cited as sociopathic, one official for the International Motorsports Association recalled, "He is the most terrifying man I have ever met." In one instance, John stormed into the racing offices and catapulted a full briefcase across the room like a frisbee, narrowly missing the secretary. A racing promoter also recalled John showing up to a radio show where his son John Jr. was being interviewed. John proceeded to scream and rant at his son in front of the staff for something that John Jr. had done that afternoon. John Jr. apparently didn't recover from the abuse and spent the rest of the interview rattled and beat. Colleen had mentioned on a few occasions that John got verbally abusive when he drank, but was there much more going on than that behind closed doors? And if this wasn't all enough to cause serious alarm, Michael also found out that John's second wife, Shalise Alford, had mysteriously gone missing in the summer of 1981 after flying down to Key West with John on a second honeymoon. Shalise Alford was a Delta Airlines flight attendant who grew up in the Florida Panhandle. It's not clear how she and John met, but they got married at the Coca-Cola 400 race in Salisbury, Connecticut in 1980. It was the second marriage for both of them, and they moved to Atlanta, Georgia. However, the honeymoon stage of their relationship seemed short-lived, as Shalise was allegedly fired from her airline job after John had a violent outburst in her presence at the Bermuda airport. Following this incident, Shalise separated from John and went back home to Florida. During this separation period, she changed careers and began auditioning for acting roles. In the winter of 1981, she was cast in a film called Sharky's Machine with Burt Reynolds, which would begin filming in Atlanta that summer. So she went back to Atlanta in June. She did not move back in with John though, she got her own apartment. However, shortly before she was supposed to begin filming, John showed up at her house unannounced. He was hoping for reconciliation and a second chance at that marriage. He got Shalise to agree to take a second honeymoon down to Key West. The last time anyone saw Shalise, she and John were boarding a plane at the Atlanta airport headed for the Keys. She never came back. When questioned, John claimed that Shalise had left him on her own accord in Key West, which is why he came back without her. Despite these claims, Shalise has never been seen or heard from again. After reading all of this, Colleen Wood's sons feared for their mother's life. John was the last person she'd been with, and he was the only person who could know where she was or what had happened to her. Michael called the police to report his findings on John Paul, but Colleen had been missing for over 2 months by this point, and doing any investigative work was very difficult. Despite the lack of evidence, detectives were able to discover that starting around December 18th of 2000, Colleen's ATM card showed a high frequency of use that did not match her usual banking habits. In addition to the frequency of use, large amounts of cash had been pulled each time, far more than what normal everyday expenses would have cost. Detectives also uncovered surveillance tapes showing that Colleen's money had been withdrawn by 2 different women who were clearly not her. When questioned, these women told police that they had been paid by a man named John Paul to make these withdrawals. Investigators also learned that John Paul had used Colleen's credit cards to buy ads looking for romantic sailing partners for a trip around the world, which was exactly what he'd done to get Colleen in the first place. But where had John gone? Surprisingly, in April of 2001, Michael was shocked to pick up the phone and hear John Paul's voice. John Paul tried to explain to Michael that he and Colleen had had a huge fight right before they were meant to embark on their tour, and Colleen had left him in the Keys. Michael did not believe John Paul, and he asked where he was at that moment. John Paul told Michael that he was in Europe, and Michael sent that information to the police. Through this phone call, police were able to locate John Paul, and he was not in Europe. He and the Diamond Girl were in a marina facility a few miles north of Key West. Investigators brought him in for an interview where he repeated that he and Colleen had a large fight about money. He claimed that she'd loaned him some money and she wanted it back, and it blew up to such a degree that she'd left him standing on the deck of the schooner, then came back a little while later with 2 men to collect her belongings. He had no idea where she'd gone or who these men were. Police needed to search his schooner, but they didn't have enough evidence. Luckily, John Paul had violated his federal probation by leaving the Fort Lauderdale area to take Colleen down to the Keys. So police filed his violations in order to obtain the search warrant. But the Florida legal system took about a week to log the violation and approve that search warrant. By the time investigators returned to the facility to serve the warrant, John Paul had sailed away. The only way to find Colleen was to find John Paul. Federal agencies coordinated with the Fort Lauderdale police to find the Diamond Girl schooner, but John was an elusive fish. According to Colleen's family, John, who apparently changed his name to Hans, had several run-ins with the law over the next 2 years, but they never had enough to hold him on and he was always released. Then, in 2004, John was in Fiji, where he met a young woman and he asked her to come aboard the Diamond Girl. However, this woman's family recognised John and his schooner as being related to Colleen's disappearance. The family was able to get their daughter away from John Paul and off the schooner before anything happened. And luckily for police, this young woman took something off of John's boat, a laptop, and that laptop turned out to belong to Colleen. The evidence turned the investigation from Colleen being missing to Colleen most likely being deceased. For one, if she was alive and she had come to collect her belongings as John had claimed, there is a very low probability that she wouldn't have taken her laptop. The fact that it was in John's possession 4 years after her disappearance was not only suspicious, but also pointed to how he had such easy access to Colleen's financial accounts. But as compelling as this evidence was, John sailed away before any arrests could be made. Between 2004 and 2006, John docked his boat in Madrid for 10 days, and while law enforcement went after him for parole violations, he escaped Madrid authorities and went back out to sea. Nothing more was heard about John Paul until 2011, when he allegedly sold Diamond Girl. As of the time of this podcast recording, John Paul still has an outstanding warrant in the United States for violating parole, and detectives really want to speak with him about Colleen Wood. But to date, the FBI doesn't know, or at least has not publicly announced, where John Paul is. He would be around 86 years old at the time of this recording, so there is a possibility he may not even be alive any longer. However, despite his lack of location, it's still possible he may have confessed to someone out there about Colleen. If this is the case and they're listening, we hope they will come forward to police with their story so that the Wood family can finally have some closure. But while we wait for that to happen, we can only speculate on what happened out at sea. Based on John's past actions and his penchant for violent anger, the most likely scenario is that John murdered Colleen. We can estimate that he killed her somewhere between December 15th and 18th based on when the strange ATM transactions began. Her family believes that their argument over the money Colleen asked him to invest for her fueled John's violence, and that he strangled Colleen before throwing her body overboard. While researching this case online, people seem to still be looking for John Paul. This is a comment from Reddit that was made a few years ago by the owner of the website shelleyspaul.com. Update: we are still actively looking for John Paul Sr. There has been a report he is still alive and well and running a dive shop in Thailand. there should be some pressure put on the remaining living Paul family in the US to assist law enforcement. December 2025 marked 25 years since Colleen was last seen. According to the Charlie Project, Colleen was 5'2" and weighed 115 pounds when she vanished. She's described as a white female with grey and blonde hair and brown eyes. It's said that she may also use the last name Tandarich. Colleen was 53 years old when she went missing, and she would now be 78 years old. NamUs lists the Fort Lauderdale Police Department as the contact for Colleen's case, so please get in touch with them if you have any information on either Colleen or John Paul Sr.'s whereabouts. Unfortunately, until John Paul or someone that he may have told the truth to comes forward, this case is likely not solvable. We hope that by sharing Colleen's story, we keep her memory alive and may, by some miracle, spread the word enough to get justice and closure for her family. A special thanks to Megan over at Women in Crime Podcast for sharing her research on this case. We'd love for you to follow us on social media. We're on every major platform, so search for us on your favourites, and we'll be sure to include links in the show notes. You can also find us on our website, belowthesurfacepodcast.net. If you'd like to show your support for this show and get your episodes early and ad-free, consider an AbJack Insider subscription through Apple Podcasts. For only $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year, not only will you get early and ad-free access to this show, but to every show on the AbJack network of shows. To get started, just head over to Apple Podcasts and search for the AbJack Entertainment channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. Finally, we'd very much appreciate you leaving a rating or review on the platform you're listening to us now on. This will really help us grow, and it helps new listeners to find the show. And please tell your friends about Below the Surface. Nothing beats word of mouth. We will see you back in 2 weeks with an all-new episode. Thank you all so much.
Below the Surface is hosted and narrated by Olivia McKenzie, with research and writing by Abigail Belcastro, and it's produced by Mike Morford for AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to join us for the next episode of Below the Surface.